Everyone talks about Florida as if it were a perfect paradise, endless sunshine, postcard beaches, and vibrant cities. But there's an uncomfortable detail: half of the state feels forgotten. The South is booming with growth, while the North remains empty, almost frozen in time. And that's where the real question lies. Is this emptiness a problem, or the region's greatest advantage? Understanding why the northern Florida population is so small reveals secrets that will change the way you see South versus North Florida. Florida's geography is more fragile than many people think. The state's highest point reaches just 345 feet, practically a hill by American standards. This explains why floods and hurricanes always find easy ground to move across. Anyone who has driven through the Panhandle knows a single heavy rain is enough to make rivers overflow and cover roads with water. The soil holds secrets too. Much of the state sits on a base of porous limestone, which creates underground rivers and crystal-clear springs, but also paves the way for the infamous sinkholes. Entire houses have been swallowed overnight. And this isn't an urban legend. In 2013, a 20-foot hole collapsed under a home in Seffner, terrifying residents, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. The east and west coasts highlight the contrast even more. On the Atlantic side, barrier islands face the full force of the tides. On the Gulf, mangroves and wetlands create a wilder, more resilient landscape. It's as if nature built two types of defenses, each revealing a different side of the state's identity. Observing this makes it clear that the South versus North Florida divide begins with the land itself. And when it comes to climate, the separation becomes obvious. The South lives under a humid tropical regime, attracting retirees and tourists chasing endless sunshine. The North, however, deals with cold winters, violent storms, and sudden shifts. This instability helps explain much of the Florida demographics because, let's face it, when people can choose, they'd rather have warmth and beaches than cold and unpredictability. Still, geography alone doesn't tell the whole story. It's in culture where the division becomes most visible. In the North, the landscape tells a different story. Gentle hills, pine forests, and wide rivers make it feel more like Alabama or Georgia than the postcard version of Miami. Life there follows that rhythm, more rural, more conservative, more tied to the roots of the so-called Deep South. It's in this environment that the northern Florida population keeps traditions that might seem strange to those who only know the state's tourist side. The South, on the other hand, feels like another planet. Crowded beaches, beachfront skyscrapers, and rapidly expanding urban centers dominate the scene. Urbanization runs wild, fueled by tourism and the promise of a sunny lifestyle. It's no wonder that when people think of Florida geography, what comes to mind is Miami Beach, not a farm in the Panhandle. This contrast even shows up in accents, traditional foods, and everyday habits. In the North, Southern influence sets the tone, with backyard barbecues and close-knit community life. In the South, diversity is striking, blending Latin American immigrants, European tourists, and young entrepreneurs. The result is a cultural collision that shapes Florida demographics in ways that are almost irreconcilable. And here's the detail few people consider. This cultural divide helps explain why people avoid Florida in certain areas. Those seeking excitement and modernity rarely feel drawn to the North. Meanwhile, those who value quiet and tradition often frown upon the South. The polarity is so strong that it practically dictates where each person chooses to live, and that choice is reflected in settlement patterns across the state. The map makes it clear: Florida's major cities are concentrated in the South. Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale are hubs of explosive growth, filled with skyscrapers, busy highways, and airports that connect the state to the entire world. It's no exaggeration to say these centers have turned Florida into an international showcase. From the outside, it may look like the whole state follows this pace, but the northern Florida population tells a very different story. In the north, the reality is almost the opposite. Rural areas, small communities, and a lifestyle far removed from the tourist frenzy dominate the landscape. The Panhandle, for instance, is marked by vast stretches of farmland and nearly untouched coastline. This difference is no coincidence. It's tied to how migration flows settled over time, shaping Florida demographics in an uneven way. While the South attracted waves of immigrants and heavy investments in tourism and infrastructure, the North remained more isolated. The result is a scenario where population density is concentrated in just a handful of cities, with Jacksonville standing out as the exception. Even so, the city doesn't come close to the urban intensity of the South, reinforcing the divide of South versus North Florida. If you look at the Panhandle, one glaring detail stands out: there are no major international ports. That alone explains part of the North's economic isolation. While New Orleans and Louisiana became the commercial gateway for the region, northern Florida was left in the background. This lack of global connection blocked any chance of accelerated development. The South, however, took a different path. Ports like Miami and Port Everglades turned the region into a gateway for trade with Latin America and the Caribbean. Railroads and highways linked strategic cities, creating an ecosystem ready to welcome both tourists and investors. It's in this environment that Florida demographics exploded, drawing people from all over the world. Orlando is the perfect example of how infrastructure changes everything. First came the real estate boom driven by the citrus industry. Then, Disney's arrival in 1971 and the growth of the Kennedy Space Center put the city on the global map. Meanwhile, the northern Florida population kept relying on agriculture, fishing, and smaller-scale industries, nothing that could compete with the South's shine. And even Jacksonville, the largest hub in the north, couldn't break that barrier. Despite its relevance, it remains overshadowed by the fast-paced growth of southern cities. This difference explains why people avoid Florida when they think of the North. It lacks the feeling of immediate opportunity. But the economy is just a reflection. What truly reshaped the state's population map was migration and demographics. Florida didn't grow because of births, but because of migration. In many years, the number of deaths has actually exceeded births, and yet the state's population has exploded. The secret lies in migration flows, retirees from the northern U.S. chasing endless sunshine, and immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean injecting diversity and energy into southern cities. These movements uniquely shaped Florida demographics. This phenomenon explains much of the South versus North Florida divide. The South, with its tropical allure, became a magnet for those seeking warm weather and business opportunities. The northern Florida population, however, never received the same intensity of migration. The result: smaller towns, faster aging, and a sense of isolation. It's as if the states coexist, but only one shines on the growth maps. It's worth noting that this process creates contrasts in everyday life. In the South, you hear multiple languages spoken on the streets of Miami. In the North, a more traditional atmosphere prevails, barely touched by migration waves. The South's demographic profile is vibrant, young, and multicultural. The North's is more homogeneous, older, and conservative. And this isn't just statistics, it shapes the economy, culture, and even politics. Few people remember that the Panhandle was once Spanish territory. Back then, it was called West Florida, a disputed region, but with little economic value. It was only with the Adams-Zonas Treaty of 1819 that the United States officially took control of the area. Interestingly, neighboring Alabama never lifted a finger to claim the land. As a result, the territory ended up with Florida almost by accident. This historical detail helps explain why the northern Florida population never gained the same strength as the South. If the region didn't spark much interest from the very beginning, investments weren't likely to come later either. The South, by contrast, became a strategic hub for trade and tourism, while the Panhandle started its journey in the background. Even today, that historical legacy weighs on Florida demographics. Looking at 19th century maps, it's clear that the lack of infrastructure prevented any kind of population boom. Poor roads, the absence of major international ports, and weak connections to larger economic centers all played a role. That lack of historic appeal reinforced the South versus North Florida divide that still defines the state today. And this ties directly into modern perceptions. Many wonder why people avoid Florida when they look at the North, without realizing the roots are in history. The region was annexed without strategy, without immediate value, and without development priority. Ironically, though, that apparent neglect created an unexpected outcome: preserved ecosystems and less environmental impact compared to the South. The explosive growth of the South comes at a high cost. Conservation areas once dominated by Florida panthers, manatees, and migratory birds now face road collisions and relentless urban expansion. The spread of development isn't just a statistic in Florida demographics, it's a real threat to species already at risk, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Meanwhile, the northern Florida population lives in an environment under far less pressure. The Panhandle, with its lower urban density, still preserves rivers, forests, and mangroves in nearly pristine condition. The contrast is striking. The North maintains environmental stability, while the South races against time to balance tourism, infrastructure, and preservation. The line between South versus North Florida is as clear as it gets. Another often overlooked point is population aging. Florida has the highest percentage of seniors in the U.S., with many concentrated in the South, where climate and healthcare infrastructure offer more comfort. This reality strains public services, drives up costs, and changes the growth rhythm of cities. In the North, life is slower and the social impacts are far less intense. But the most dangerous challenge lies ahead: climate change. Rising sea levels threaten southern coastal cities, where billions have already been invested in beachfront real estate. In this scenario, many begin to question why people avoid Florida when thinking about the future. After all, the North may not boast the same economic shine, but it offers something the South may struggle to guarantee: environmental security. In southern Florida, movement never stops. Cities grow at a frantic pace, skyscrapers rise as if they'll stand forever, and tourists pack the beaches every single day. But this expansion comes at a cost: environmental vulnerability, climate risks, and mounting social pressures that are harder and harder to manage. It's the classic portrait of a place living on the edge. The northern Florida population, on the other hand, moves in a different direction. Growth is slower, but stability is clear. Less urbanization means less environmental stress, less social impact, and a sense of security the South can no longer provide. It's no exaggeration to say the two parts of the state look like alternate versions of each other. This contrast isn't just about numbers in Florida demographics or the South versus North Florida divide. It reflects choices, priorities, and even different visions for the future. While the South embraces growth at any cost, the North seems content with preserving its identity. And that difference leaves room for questions many prefer not to ask. Perhaps that's why so many still wonder why people avoid Florida in certain parts, without realizing that the emptiness of the North may actually be its greatest strength. In the end, the South may have the spotlight, but the North holds the quiet confidence of a place that doesn't need to prove anything. If this analysis made you see South versus North Florida in a different light, put that knowledge to use. Question the patterns, compare the scenarios, and think about what truly matters to you. And of course, leave your comment. Which side of Florida would you choose? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll keep getting content that not only informs but also challenges the way you see the world.